Welcome to Ignatius Press Off the Shelf. We're getting close to the conclusion of our discussion of The Wedding of Magdeburg by Gertrude Von Le Fort. I mean, it's not that, big of a book, but it certainly is compact and dense in a good sense,
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to, so I don't forget it, our next book will be John Henry Newman, A Life Sacrificed by Ida Friederike Goethe, wonderful German psychologist, I think, and writer. Very much appreciated by Pope Benedict, Balthasar, and others. But so we're now on this third section here, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought we left off around page 160, but before we get to there, you had responded to a question that it was asked.
Yes, Father asked at our last session where Colonel von Falkenberg came from. So I looked him up, and he was born in Herstalla, a small town in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is a region in central Germany. But here's what was really interesting. His father was the steward of the Imperial Abbey of Corvey, which at that time was run by a Catholic prince abbot, and a partly Protestant council. Because as we know, the religious wars have already been going on and off with different sorts of peace agreements. So now we have this kind of hybrid area. And as a young man, Falkenberg was a military advisor to the Calvinist ruler of nearby Hesse-Kassel. And he's the one who sent him to serve the King of Sweden. And here's another interesting sort of irony. In 1634, 3 years after the fall of Magdeburg, the abbey was sacked by the imperial side. So it's sort of a nutshell of the religious division, strife, and warfare that's been going on in this part of Germany for some time. And that's what the Wedding of Magdeburg is about.
Yes, and the whole 30 Years' War, she is critical of, I think for the right reasons.
Yes. In some point in this pages, she refers to it as a fratricidal war between Germans. And certainly Germany bore the brunt of it. In some areas, 50% of the German population perished in this war.
Oh.
I mean, that's just devastation.
So I want to quote a couple of passages from page 161. They have to do with Backe, Minister Backe's wife, whose name we never know. But it was, you said, off screen here, Vivian, is sort of the model or image of the perfect Christian or the good Christian. So at the top there, we read, seeing Backe enter, she, his wife, immediately stopped singing and presented him with a little girlish face for a kiss. So it's a girl. It's a childlikeness here. It's a girlish face, right? It lay nestled in the white platter of her ruff, looking as kindly and sweet and bride-like as if the terrible firing of the guns had raged all morning were but one part in the song of their marriage and their lives together. So for her, these battles are secondary to fidelity in marriage, fruitfulness and having children, and so on. And then the next paragraph there, Backe, that's her husband, his eyes suddenly welled up with bright tears. He felt that all the resistance, all the opposition, all the protesting and rebelling and triumphing that he had constantly preached up on the rampart, that is, Magdeburg, we're going to resist, we're going to triumph, we're going to rebel, was altogether pitiful, almost faithless gallantry compared to the courage and fortitude that his dear wife had shown before him and their young children this whole time. And then the very bottom of the page there, about 8 lines up, it was as though a severe vicious cramp in his innermost being. That is, he's cramped up because he wants to resist, and save the faith and, you know, rebel against the empire, had been thereby released. And everything was now wondrously clear, quiet, confident, and certain, whatever might come to pass. And as his head lowered to his wife's heart, he felt that his soul now rested in God's hands. He did not even notice a thudding hoofbeats coming from the street outside. I mean, that, again, there's so many different statements and paragraphs that kind of sum up the whole book, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for me, that's
The
what.
the one thing I would just add to that, Father, is that the reason that she has such peace in the midst of the threat of death is that she herself is resting in God's hands. It's her faith,
Yes.
and that's why she can be a good mother and a good wife, and to retain her serenity in the midst of the mayhem,
That's
because
right.
she feels as if she's resting in God's loving providence, and that's the only place she wants to be. And as long as she's there, she has no cares.
That's right. And the reason why she's being set up as the model Christian in this story is because that is what God asks of every believer, men and women. Ultimately, we are to place our confidence in him and say to him, your will be done. And this surrender, which throughout the course of this book, we see different characters struggling with this very point. Are they going to surrender to God's will or not? And they might even go back and forth. They might say yes today and then maybe not so much tomorrow. And in fact, Bake here, at this moment, he's giving way to the Lord through the example of his wife. But very shortly, he's going to take it back again. He's not done until the end of the book with this
Well,
tug of.
it reminds me of the wisdom of C.S. Lewis, who said, "Father will let me know whether it's me, Christianity, somewhere else. That in the end, there are only two types of people: those who say to God, 'Thy will be done,' and those to whom God says, 'Thy will be done.'" And that's the struggle here between
Yes.
pride and love. What will prevail? What's stronger, pride or love?
And we've seen that theme with, is it love makes all things possible versus pride makes all things possible. We've seen this theme tossed back and forth through the whole thing as well. And this is ultimately the theme of the whole book that Gertrude Von Le Fort is exploring, that, for the role of every Christian vis-a-vis God is to surrender ourselves to him. And it's hard.
And what makes this novel beautifully complex is that the Empress trying to do God's will, and so is Tilly, and so is Bake. That is to say, we want to preserve the faith, the true faith, right? And we're fighting under the banner of Mary for the imperial side, but does she want to conquer that? Is it God's will that the faith conquers by force? That's,
Well, does love conquer by force? See, that's really the question. If love doesn't conquer by force, then when we choose the tools of force to try to conquer another person, to get him to believe, even if what we're trying to get him to believe is something correct, if you choose the tools of force and oppression and violence, then you're not on the right side.
Which is why I think, if you look at history, that it's only when Christians have used force legitimately, in other words, in accordance with Catholic teaching and just war, in other words, in legitimate defence, that there's ever been any providential benefits come from it. Whenever Catholics, Catholics, Christians have tried to force themselves and force the issue upon others, it's always backfired. It's never actually brought about the desired end, as indeed it's the case here with the sacking of Magdeburg. One thing I can say, while we're still talking about Dr. Backer's wife, are we ever given her name, by the way?
No.
No, interesting. So, but towards the bottom of page 162, right? So this is Falkenberg, right? The sort of almost the diabolus in the story, right? In certain imagery about him, but then all of a sudden, a look of great astonishment came over her little girlish face. For the colonel was looking at them with such timidity that it seemed the young children made him even more anxious than he made them. This touched her heart so strangely. She felt like removing the helmet from his head and comfortingly stroking his hair as if he were one of the poor, terrified children. She quickly led the children to the house so that the sight of them would no longer upset him. So here we have, one of the most difficult things that the Christians are commanded to do is to love our enemy. And she has no difficulty in that at all. She wants to comfort him, even though she knows that he's the enemy.
Well, he's presumably fighting for the city. He's come to the city to protect the city from the imperial forces. So technically speaking, the people in Magdeburg right now think of him as their ally. But
They do, but in the same sort of way as I think the Germans thought of Hitler as their ally at the time. That this man's clearly a demagogue, and they follow him out of the sort of beguiling power he seems to have over their wills. And I suspect that does not actually apply to the little girlish wife who probably sees right through him. But that doesn't mean that she despises him.
that's right.
Because she sees him in his fullness, in his weakness. She loves him in his weakness and
That's
even in
right.
his wickedness.
That's right. And her very love for him and his weakness is the thing that he's constantly trying to resist. In that a womanly love for a man's weakness and frailty is a scary thing for a man. As you were just saying about the missionaries of charity. But back to your point, Joseph, about the kind of fellow that Falkenberg really is. On the very next page, we see that he's lording it over the town.
Where?
On page 164, at that paragraph beginning the black horse.
Yeah.
And, the colonel is saying, I'm quite happy to see pastors follow their conscience, for it is I who determine the conscience of pastors now. And if anyone dares dispute that, I will have him hanged. So von Valkenburg, who's supposedly fighting for religious freedom here, he now has taken over even the religious and spiritual leadership of the town. He's going to tell pastors now. And Bake, it's finally starting to sink into him what's happened. Further down on that page, the next paragraph, a few lines down, but this is Bake now. Yet now it seems that all we've done is betray our own freedom of conscience. Right here, they thought they were fighting against the emperor, and they are. The emperor is not right to reimpose the Catholic faith on them after having given them the right to practice the Protestant form of Christianity. They were fighting for their conscience, and yet now this fellow, who's supposedly on their side, has taken over their conscience. All right, that's...
It's interesting. In the middle of that, this recurring motif, this recurring image of the gospel about the destruction of Jerusalem, re-enters Dr. Backer's mind, as if perhaps after all they are under the control of a wicked force, and therefore may indeed face the punishment for such.
Yes.
Before we continue, now, Joseph, I believe you read the entire book, right?
I did. I read it on the way back from England this week.
Okay. And just overall, what are your sense? How do you react to the overall book and the ending? How it comes?
It's marvelous. In fact, this morning I wrote an essay, a 1,500-word essay, entitled, if I can remember now, "War, Weddings, and Wisdom: Discovering a New Classic." And so that will, I imagine, be published by the Majestic Conservative over the next few days, and I'll send you the link. But no, I think it's a marvelous book. I do think it's a classic of literature. I'm astonished that it's taken so long for it to be translated into English, and I think bravo to Ignatius Press for doing so.
Thank you. I wasn't trying to elicit that, but since you said it, I'll accept it. But all right, onward, Vivian.
Okay, so you mentioned that the fall of Jerusalem imagery returns, and so here we just saw Bake, realizing the humility of his wife's example needs to be his own humility with surrendering to God. But this high gate, and now he's hearing the Jerusalem imagery again in his mind, soul, whatever. And when the high gate of the city falls on the imperial troops and not inward into the city, he's back onto the go Magdeburg side, we see what's so, I think, great about Gertrude Von Le Fort. Charles Dickens once said, "I never created a character I didn't love." And I think
Gradgrind? Anyway, go ahead.
and so I think Gertrude Von Le Fort here, she loves all these characters. She sees even von Valkenburg, the fact that she could write about him in this tender way. She sees the struggle that they're all facing, and she knows that this is the struggle that all of us face. So she's very sympathetic to the struggle, and I really appreciate that about her as a writer. They're not just cartoon bad guys and good guys, not at all.
There's of course the counterpoint to the holy wife, shall we say, as we don't have her name, Dr. Buckler's wife, is of course Erdmuth, and middle of page 166 we have this sort of ironic reference again to the parable of the wise and foolish virgins. Middle of the page there after the break. Erdmuth had decorated her house from top to bottom, and every morning she put on her finest dress. His Royal Majesty could be expected at any hour, and she had to be ready to receive him. Of course, His Royal Majesty is the foreign king, the counterfeit bridegroom, not Christ. So she's like one of the wise virgins who's remaining prepared for the coming of the bridegroom, but it's a false counterfeit bridegroom for which she is preparing herself.
That's right.
Great irony.
Yes, and so that makes her a foolish bridesmaid rather than a wise one. In this case, a foolish bride. She's the bride herself. And on the bottom of 167, we see that in her mind, she's got von Valkenburg in her power, where a friend of hers has come over to talk to her. And this is the last line on page 167. Colonel von Valkenburg, who held everything here in the palm of his hand, she held in hers. So she thinks. And yet, the very next page, when von Valkenburg appears, she literally goes running into his arms. And on 169, we see that von Valkenburg knows very well he's in command of the city and he is in command of her. And
yeah, on that page as well, I mean, this the final sentence in the middle paragraph there. One cannot help but laugh. This is von Valkenburg's thoughts. One cannot help but laugh. The combined forces of League and Empire are out there preparing to storm her native city, and she's worried that she herself will be put to shame.
yes,
So basically, what really matters is herself and the hurting of her pride, nothing else. But right at the end of that page, though, Vivian, he felt a disappointing sense of liberation.
yes. What page are you on there, Joseph?
It's the bottom of page 169.
Oh, yes,
Remember,
yes,
the
yes.
very bottom line. He felt a disappointing sense of liberation. So, he almost succumbs to the feminine charm. He almost succumbs to the idea of family and children and marriage. And then he sees how pathetic and ridiculous it all is because of the pomp and pride of Erdmuth. But in liberating himself from this weakness, there's a disappointment.
Yes, because
yes, he has the freedom, but the freedom seems to be not something that's going to satisfy him or make him happy. It's almost as if the freedom is something which is burdensome on him.
yes, because God making us male and female, our female and male powers, if you will, are meant to complement each other and work together for fruitfulness. And whether that's married fruitfulness or the fruitfulness of the religious state or whatever, the point of our sexual differentiation and sexual powers is not to be lording over each other and manipulating each other. It's to surrender to God's will so that everything can be put in its proper place and fruitfulness can be achieved. So whether he's resisting what he's made for as a man, not to just be a killing machine for hire, but a husband, a father, he might be resisting that with every ounce of his being. And yet, what was he made to do by God himself? And the same thing with Erdmuth. She too was meant for marriage and motherhood, but not because she was able to twist some man around her finger, but rather, who is the true bridegroom? Ultimately, it's Jesus. And in this case, she has a fiancé, Viligus, who's also one of the heroes of the story. He's the earnest young man trying to save his city. And when we get to the end and we see what he does,
I know.
how can you still have a dry eye, right? But we'll get there.
Okay, but I want to, just prior to that little phrase on 169 at the bottom, we read, he was once again the sole master of affairs.
Mm-hmm.
He and he alone. That gets repeated a couple of times.
Mm-hmm. It does.
And that was a disappointing sense of liberation. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm free now because I'm in charge. But wait a minute. I'm not supposed to be in charge.
That's right.
I want to go back to this one thing
Very
in
good.
168, bottom of the paragraph at the top there. He, I forget who that is, looked with unease at the blossoming pear tree,
Yes.
which stood there still, snow white as a luminous bride in the middle of the bombarded stronghold. So one of the beauties of this novel is that there's so many images that converge. We have the Elbe River, which sometimes is waning, sometimes waxing. We got this pear tree there.
Yes. Yes.
And the pear tree's blossoming, and yet all this battle's going on around it,
Yes.
And Father, what I love about this is why this novel is also a poem. This imagery is repeated like a refrain, because on page 171,
Mm-hmm.
I have von Falkenberg, the pear tree, about 10 lines down, third line down of the second paragraph. The pear tree at the window was positively bursting forth with blossoms, but this was its final splendor. Tomorrow they would fall.
Yes.
And in this sense, the pear tree is a metaphor for both the city of Magdeburg and Erdmuth.
Yes.
So two different brides, both of which are in full blossom, but both of which in the prime of their beauty are going to basically fall and lose it all.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Of course, this is prophetic of what happens to her without spoiling. This is prophetic what will actually happen to her once the city falls.
That's right. That's right. Exactly right. It's a beautiful image. So let's see. Where do we want to go from here? Oh, this other disappointment of that liberation that he knows he has is repeated again on 172. Everything that's shown, this is in the house now, the house that's been prepared for the bridegroom. Originally, that bridegroom was going to be Viligus. Then she switched. It's going to be the king in Falkenberg. Everything that's shown and sparkled here was already destined to fall, again, like the blossoms on the tree, into their clutches, as was the maiden herself. Now the author's being very explicit. And here, von Falkenberg actually thinks, why not take her away then? So that deeper instinct of a man to want to protect a woman, is starting to rear up again. Why not take her away then before it happened? But today he did not feel that oddly gentle sense of defenselessness in the face of life. Instead, he felt contempt for life, from which he might wrest one final thrill precisely because he despised it. He felt no longer disappointment, but only the liberation of knowing that he and he alone was the sole master of affairs. There it gets repeated again.
Yeah.
But again, this is not what he was made to do.
And then he is basically going to endeavor to seduce her forcefully, and she's only saved by what's happening in the war.
That's right.
This is the final thrill he wants now, is just to basically take her maidenhood without marriage.
That's right. And
Which is itself a metaphor for the storming of the city.
That's right. That's right.
I want to go back on page 172. New paragraph there, because this again brings back a theme. So now Erdmuth and von Falkenberg are going through the house, where she's showing out how the king is going to be here and there, this false hope. They had now reached the room where she'd planned to lay the table at which the king would dine. Today there was no need for her to open the chests and cupboards to show him her trousseau. The table was already decked out with her Aunt Engelke's choice of tableware. Her Aunt Regula's silver centerpiece stood resplendent in the middle, and her Aunt Itze's polished Bohemian glassware shone and sparkled. So again, we got the three spinster, sisters prior to her that were looking for fulfillment and were always disappointed. And now she's going to finally be the, oh, it's not going to happen to me, right?
Right. Well, and again, all this imagery working together, these spinster women who never married, that means all of their wedding gear is virginal. It's never been touched before. So we have the pear tree blossoms. We have the beautiful things in the home that have never been touched before. The house itself is the bridal house. I mean, all these layers of meaning, and it's all going to be pillaged and raped and robbed, and because of the pride of the city. And von Valkenburg is stirring it up, because we'll see that not only does he not give in to the temptation, I mean, it was actually an honorable thought to try to save Erdmuth, right? It was actually an honorable thought to marry her and save her. And when the men of the town end up thinking of also saving their city, who is it that persuades them not to but von Valkenburg? So now we go to, can we go to 180? Because now we see what's going on in Magdeburg. Now we're going to see what's going on in the camp of General Tilly and his decision-making, right?
I just want to make a couple of comments.
Sure.
On 174 at the bottom. The fair, blonde waters of the Elbe were once more topping their banks. So it's the pear tree at the height of its blossoming. You see Elbe now at the height of its kind of, flow and everything. And then on page 176, just above the middle there, but Colonel von Falkenberg no longer had any pity. He was the sole master of affairs, he and he alone. I'm just going to point out that repetition, because she uses that figure of speech or whatever, that rhetorical technique of repetition of certain phrases.
Yes, she does, which then makes
which is why it's poetic. And of course, what is this repeated refrain by Colonel von Valkenburg? To be the sole master of affairs, he and he alone, is of course pride will conquer all. Right? These are the two understandings of life, the two philosophies at stake here. What actually is the conqueror? Is it pride or is it love? And again, within the light or the darkness or the shadow of Hitler, and of course the Nietzscheanism of the Nazi regime, where it's all about the will to power. The Triumph of the Will was actually the name of the Nazi propaganda film. That this also it's very, very relevant and pertinent to Gertrude Von Le Fort's own time, and of course to our own time also, which is why a great book is timeless, right? It transcends particular moments because it's speaking about permanent things.
Transcends in the sense that it's what Balthasar called the concrete universal. That is, it is a particular time and place, but it expresses something which applies to all times and all places. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, well, we're getting the time signals. Does that mean we should stop?
We have a couple more minutes if you want to go on a little bit.
Well, I was hoping to get through this book in this session, but we're not
We're
there.
not going to do it.
So I would like to move though to the back and forth between Tilly and his generals.
Yes.
To see that dynamic going on, and Tilly is looking worn and haggard because he's been fighting the Swedes back and forth all over the countryside. And he returns from all of this, though, still determined to try to save the city of Magdeburg and does not want to destroy it. So I think that's interesting that he still, he got that inspiration from the Blessed Mother that she did not want to conquer these people for religious reasons with the sword, but conquer with the love of her son. And he's sticking to that inspiration in spite of the fact that he's losing the war. So
Yes.
Tilly's losing?
That His Excellency Tilly, he sees the danger of what's going to happen, the danger of his own army as a mob. And he says at the bottom of page 184, "Are my noble generals sure it is not we to whom the army will demonstrate its power?" That's their own army, not another army. "When we let them loose in the city, surely the gentlemen will be aware that according to the articles of war, if the soldiery storm a city, they're entitled to plunder it."
that's right.
So he already the writing on the wall of what's going to happen when they succeed.
That's right. That's right. And so then he's got compassion for the people of the city. That's one level. But he also realizes, as we see in the middle of 185, that it's strategically bad to destroy this city. With firm resolve, this is about 2/3 of the way down on 185. With firm resolve, His Excellency reminded his generals that he was concerned with taking the strategic position intact, and his good generals were concerned with their victories. But in ruins, there were only lost strategic positions and no victories. So Tilly is seeing, remember the previous back and forth, is it the ratio belli or is it the well, it turns out here in Tilly's mind, the wishes of the Blessed Virgin Mary and good war making are actually coinciding. If we don't destroy the city and show it mercy, that's actually a win. Yeah.
Good luck.
And evil is ultimately self-destructive. It's as simple as that.
Evil is
The wickedness that's dealt out on the city will actually harm the people who are harming the city.
That's right.
Good. This is a good break point.
Yep.
So let's end it here. We'll see you next session. God bless you.